evening. My name is Phil Schomber. I'm the adult programmer here at Hedberg. And I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker, Melanie Radzicki McManus. I told her I'd mess that up, and I think I honored that promise. No, it is a pleasure to be able to introduce her. Melanie was a reporter for a Green Bay radio station. She was also a press secretary at the Madison Capitol, and I believe editor of 2 Madison publications. Is that correct? More recently, she's been a freelance writer, winning the prestigious Lowell Thomas Gold and Grand Award. Okay, doing well. Yes. But she's also the author of 1,000-miler Adventures Hiking the Ice Age Trail, which she's here to talk to us tonight about. And if you haven't already gotten a copy, you'll have a chance after the program to pick one up and to have Melanie sign it. The book covers her record-setting trek on the 1,100-mile Ice Age Trail, and we're fortunate to have her here tonight to tell us a little bit about that experience. So please welcome Melanie Radzicki McManus.
Me? I can't tell if it's on or not. Well, thank you so much for coming out today. I really appreciate it. It's a very nice evening, but we're going to have a lot of fun here today. We're going to talk all about the Ice Age Trail, which I am very passionate about, and I hope all of you either already are or will be by the time we're finished here. So raise your hand if you know anything at all about the Ice Age Trail. All right, that's fantastic. You have one up on me, or at least me, from 6 years ago, because 6 years ago I knew nothing about the Ice Age Trail, even though I did a lot of travel writing, and a lot of travel writing about Wisconsin. But let's start at the beginning here. This is, by the way, a new clicker, so if I make a few mistakes, okay, that's a mistake. There we go, all right. So this is our Ice Age Trail. It's one of just 11 national scenic trails in the nation. And I always stop at this point, right as I've just started talking, to impress upon people how awesome that is. There are just 11 national scenic trails in our nation, including the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, and we have one of them in our state of Wisconsin. That's a very big honor, and it's prestigious, and we need to finish this trail, which is only about 2/3 completed. We need to use it, we need to promote it, and we need to be as proud of this trail as we are of the Packers and our cheese curds. Because truly, this is a gem. And again, as being a travel writer for so long and working with many of the big editors of the big publications on the coast, there's a bias against the Midwest, and they call us flyover country, and a lot of the big name publications say, don't give us any story ideas from the Midwest. No one wants to go to the Midwest, blah, blah, blah. And even though we know that's not true, because we know how wonderful the Midwest is, my own personal thought is that sometimes that if you hear that over and over again, and we're modest people here in the Midwest, it can kind of get into your subconscious a little bit. And I don't want anyone ever to think this trail is not as good as the Appalachian or the Pacific Crest or some of these others. So again, this is a very wonderful honor to have this trail in our home state. So let me tell you a little bit more about it. The Ice Age Trail, it goes about 1,150 miles through the state. It's about 2/3 completed, as I said, and about 1/3 what's called connecting road routes. Now, even though the trail isn't totally completed, you can still hike the whole thing. So how is that possible? Well, when you finish a trail segment, let's say the next trail segment is 2 miles away, you just have to walk there. You can't take a bike or a scooter or a pogo stick. You have to walk on your feet if you want to officially hike the trail. But that's all you need to do. And the Ice Age Trail Alliance, which I'll talk about a little later, which is the group that's basically in charge of the trail, they have suggested road walks to get you from the end of one trail segment to the start of the next. So you can get their maps. Some of them are online. You can purchase them, whatever you prefer. There's an app. But you just have to go by your own 2 feet. So the trail's western terminus is here. That's St. Croix Falls. It's an interstate state park, which is our first state park in Wisconsin. It was opened in 1900. It goes about 450 miles across the northern tier. This is what I call the wildest and wooliest section of the trail. It's where there are some of the most remote segments, where you'll really feel like you're maybe in the backwoods of Montana or something. It also has the most concentration of completed trails, so there are not many roadwalks in the northern part of the state. This little dot here, that's Antigo. The trail comes down through here. I'll talk about this bubble later. And here, the southernmost part of the trail is Janesville. Yay! And I was told people at the Ice Age Trail Alliance at one point, we should mark the southernmost and easternmost if it's not in the middle of the lake, and the northernmost trail. And someone said, there is a sign in Janesville that marks it. It's by Rotary Gardens. So I got here early today and tried to find that sign and could not find it. Oh, it's gone? Oh, well, that's why. But anyway, yeah, so Janesville has the distinction of being the southernmost part of the trail. Then it goes up through Kettle Moraine. There's 2 miles right on Lake Michigan, and then the eastern terminus is in Potawatomi State Park in Sturgeon Bay. So as I said, the Ice Age Trail is one of 11 national scenic trails. Here's a look at where all of the other ones are. I will go through them quickly here and then in a little more depth in subsequent slides. So we have the Pacific Crest that was made popular by Cheryl Strayed's book Wild in the movie Wild. This is a Pacific Northwest Trail, Continental Divide, Arizona Trail, Natchez Trace, Florida Trail, which I hiked last year. This is the Granddaddy Appalachian Trail, Potomac Heritage, little guy here, New England Trail. I also hiked that one last year. This is the North Country Trail, little bits in Wisconsin, and our Ice Age Trail. So it's a kind of a nice representation. It does cover much of the United States. So let's go through them all, learn a little bit about them. The Appalachian Trail, 2,200 miles. It goes from Springer Mountain, Georgia in the south to Mount Katahdin in Maine. That was built in the 1920s and 30s. It's considered the granddaddy of America's long-distance hiking trails. The Pacific Crest, again made popular by Cheryl Strayed, goes from Mexico to Canada through California, Oregon, and Washington, 2,650 miles. Unfortunately, this year, people who are trying to through hike the trail or just section hike in parts are having a lot of trouble because there's so many wildfires out there. A lot of the people have had to turn back or take very large detours around, so it's been a tough year for people on that trail. The Continental Divide, 3,100 miles, also stretching from Mexico to Canada. And it's on the Continental Divide, which is a land formation where all the water to the east flows into the Atlantic, and to the west flows in the Pacific. North Country Trail, 4,600 miles, the longest of them all. Of all that 4,600 miles, we get a little tiny bit up here. I've read conflicting figures for how long it is. It's somewhere between 150 and 250 miles we have in our state. It's all north of the Ice Age Trail. But so we're quite lucky in Wisconsin. We have our own National Scenic Trail, and we have a portion of a second National Scenic Trail. So that's awesome. Florida Trail, 1,200 to 1,400 miles, depending which way you go around these little bubbles. Potomac Heritage Trail, which kind of traces a lot of George Washington's movements, and that's 710 at last count. Natchez Trace is kind of an odd one in the system. So there's a Natchez Trace Parkway that you can drive a car on or you can bike on, and it follows where the old Natchez Trace was, which was considered America's first highway. It was a path used by a lot of settlers and troops that were moving in the early 1800s. And there's about 65 miles of trail along that 440 miles, and the association says they have no plans to build more. So I'm not quite sure how that fits in, and I did bike that, so I'm counting that as having done the trail. Pacific Northwest Trail, a friend of mine just hiked this last summer with his son and said there were no markers on the whole trail. You have a guidebook and everything, but I thought that sounds a little sketchy. And that one goes, as you can see, Montana, Idaho, and Washington. Arizona Trail, 800 miles from the south to the north, and from one border to the other, and it goes through the Grand Canyon, down and up and out. The New England Trail, the shortest one, 215 miles. When my husband and I went out there last year to hike it, we thought, this will be a snap, 215 miles. Well, it's really rocky, and it's a lot of mountains, and every night we'd lay in bed and go, the bottoms of my feet are killing me. So, and then sometimes there would just be like shale and on this big drop down, and you'd be using your trekking poles and going downhill like that, and it was intense. So don't let the length fool you. Okay, so how do we get these national scenic trails? Why do we have them? Well, it goes back to around the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. That was a time when America was shifting from an agrarian society to an industrialized society. And luckily, we had people like, President Teddy Roosevelt, who's a big environmentalist, John Muir. And people were starting to say, hey, you know what? It's great that we're industrializing. We need to industrialize, but we don't want to lose our most beautiful spots in our nation. We have to protect those, because if we don't take care of them and set them aside, it's going to be too late and we're not going to be able to get them back. So the Yellowstone it was the first national park in the late 1800s. I believe the National Park Service was formed around the early 1920s. And people started really seeing the need to create and save these spaces. And then kind of going forward to the mid-20th century, we had a lot of science and research saying, guess what? It's really great to be outdoors. It's good for your body. It's good for your mind. I just had to research a little bit about this recently for a story I was writing, and it's incredible the number of studies that are out there that show being outside, even if it's a neighborhood park, is healing on so many ways. If it's shown if you've had surgery, you'll recover faster if you walk like 10 minutes a day outside. It lowers your stress. It can lower, it helps you if you have ADHD. It's shown that it makes you more compassionate after you've been outside. I mean, it's just across a wide spectrum. So people started hearing, all right, it's really great to be outside. We need to get outside more. So then, went ahead a little too soon. Okay, so anyway, then Congress in the 1960s, under President Lyndon B. Johnson, they were all talking about this. You know, we're saving all these nice, beautiful spaces. We know it's good for people to be outside. And Americans need to take their vacation. We're still really bad about that. I just heard yesterday on the radio that 45% of Americans leave some paid vacation time on the table. So anyway, Congress is trying to help out. So they created the National Trail System Act in 1968. And one of the premises behind it was, if we allow people and organizations to create 3 classes of trails: National Scenic Trails, National Historic Trails, and National Recreation Trails, which are more urban trails, we'll be able to protect our wonderful historic and scenic sites and nice parts through our urban areas. And we'll also give people a way to enjoy them and to get outside. So that was one of the basic reasons behind creation of that act. So that was 1968. The Appalachian Trail was completed. Pacific Crest was more or less completed. So they petitioned Congress, and they were designated our first 2 national scenic trails. Now, they couldn't just go, by the way, you have to be, National Park Service has to approve your route, and Congress has to approve you as a national scenic trail. And you can't just go to Congress and say, hey, guess what? I've got an idea for a trail. It's long. They have to be at least 100 miles long. And it's pretty because trails go through the outdoors. Of course, it's going to be scenic. So please make me a national scenic trail. No, no, no. You have to have something very significant about your trail in order to get that designation, which is why there are only 11. So in the case of the Appalachian and Pacific Crest Trails, they were on major mountain ranges in America. The Appalachian Trail on the Appalachian Mountains, Pacific Crest goes through the Sierra Nevadas and Cascades. The Continental Divide is on the Continental Divide. So those are some of the reasons they were able to be named National Scenic Trails. And I'm just going to go back to one point I wanted to make. The Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest, and Continental Divide are considered the Triple Crown Trails. So if you hike all 3, you're a Triple Crown hiker. So if you hear people talking about that ever, that's what that means. But in the case of our Ice Age Trail, as you might guess from the name, why did we get to become a National Scenic Trail? Well, our trail is designed to trace what's called the terminal moraine of the last glaciation. That's such a hard word to say, glaciation. And I'll explain what that's all about. So in the Ice Age, it was about a 2.5 million year period. It was not a period of all ice, surprisingly. It was a period where there might be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of ice on the Earth, and then it would melt away. It was called a warming period. So you might have regular, good old Earth for 50,000 years or another 100,000 years. And then the ice would come back in it. And this went back and forth about 5 times over this 2.5 million year period. Some scientists say we still are in the Ice Age. We're just in one of these warming periods. We won't know, of course, because by the time the ice returns, if it does return, we won't be here. But during, scientists looking back then, during all these periods of ice and warming, identified in the last, let me back up 1 second. So the last time there was ice on the Earth was about 10 to 14,000 years ago. And during that period when the ice was on the Earth, the last time, scientists looked back and could see that it made 5 major pushes. So glaciers are always moving. They're moving forward and back and forward and back, a lot of times very incrementally, but every once in a while they'd make a very big push forward. So scientists identified where they got in North America and gave them names. So there's a Nebraskan phase and a Kansan phase. And the very last time that ice sheet made a really big push forward before it melted away, it got as far south as Wisconsin. So it's called the Wisconsin phase. And here's where the ice is. It made that shape. And then it melted away 10 to 14,000 years ago. So this is what's called the terminal moraine. It's where the ice scraped and pushed and dropped all sorts of junk in between and at the end, and then melted away. So that was what the Ice Age Trail is tracing. And the reason that Wisconsin has this Ice Age Trail, because of course there are terminal moraines in other states, is Wisconsin has what are considered some of the best glacial remains in the entire world. So people that are into the glacier and studying it come to Wisconsin to study that because we have a lot of glacial remains compared to other parts of the world, and we have a lot that are in very good condition. So yay us. Did you even know that? I didn't know that. I knew we had glacial remains, but yeah, we're one of the best in the world. So who came up with this brilliant idea to have a trail here? This guy, Ray Zillmer. Ray was born in the late 1800s. He was a lawyer in Milwaukee, so here he is as Mr. Lawyer. And he also loved to hike and mountaineer. So here he is as Mr. Hiker Mountaineer Man. So he was kind of extreme. So he and his son were the first to scale a peak in the Caribou Range in British Columbia in Canada. And so there's a Mount Zillmer named after them. But he also loved hiking trails in England. And one of the things he loved about the hiking trails in England was that they just meandered wherever in the countryside, and if there was a town there, they'd pass through the town. And he thought, well, that's really great because you're hiking along, and oh, my stomach's rumbling, and oh, it's noon. Oh, here's a town I can get a bite to eat. Hiking more, and it's the end of the day, and you're tired, and oh, here's another town. I can just rent a little room in this inn, have dinner, go to bed, wake up, and hike again. One thing he didn't like, and he was watching very much into trails during his lifetime. He helped start the trails at Kettle Moraine. He was watching avidly as the Appalachian and Pacific Crest trails were being formed. And what he didn't like that the AT and the PCT, as many people call them, were doing, well, they had the opposite theory. They thought, let's pull people up onto our mountaintops and away from civilization and keep them up there as long as we can, which is about a week if you're hiking because you need to resupply and get food. And then we'll dip them back into a town and then, oops, just get them away again, away from people, out in the woods. And he thought, well, that's silly because, first of all, it's just easier to resupply if you're regularly going through towns. It's easier to get on and off the trail if you're regularly going through towns. And it brings, like Janesville, you should know here, it brings the communities and the hikers together. So you don't have someone with a long beard and dirty and a backpack coming into town and people are like, who's that crazy guy? They know, you know each other and oh, the hikers are going to patronize our businesses and eat our food and drink our drink and stay in our hotels, and that's great, and we welcome them. So he thought that it was fine to go through towns. Now he knew, of course, about our glacial remains, and being this mountaineer hiker fan, one day he had the idea of the Ice Age Trail National Park. Now notice I said park, not trail. His first thought was, let's make a national park here in the Midwest. Because if you think of where most of our national parks are, and this is Ray thinking in the 1950s, so many of them are on the coast. And he would watch people from Wisconsin spend almost all their vacation driving out, and this is again before the interstate highway too. So they take their 2-week vacation and drive all the way out to California, wind up all these mountain roads before they could find an access spot on the Pacific Crest or wherever, and then they'd only get to experience the great outdoors for a day or two, and it would be time to go home. So he thought, no, no one should have to drive more than a half a day to get to a nice place to recreate. So he thought, well, let's build something called the Ice Age Trail Park. Oops, I'm going to go backwards here. I guess I'm going really far backwards. Sorry. Where's the slide I want? All right. I must have taken it out accidentally. I should have you just look at my shirt. All right. Sorry about that. So his idea, if you can picture this, instead of being a line, if you just picture a fat piece of land going down, I don't know if I think he might have actually died in 1960, and it might have been actually right before he presented it to Congress and the National Park Service. But he was working with people, and they did present this idea of a park in that shape. And they're like, with all due respect, that's crazy. That's a crazy idea. That's not a park. You know, a park is a piece of land like this, not this ribbon. And how in the world would we administer it? What if we had all our weed whackers down in Janesville and St. Croix Falls needed them? You know, you can't just be moving stuff around like that. So they said, no, you know, scratch that idea. And so by the end of the 1960s, the people who had been involved with Ray were still pushing for some kind of a park or something with the ice along the terminal moraine, and they came up with the idea of a hiking trail instead. So the first pieces of trail were actually in Kettle Moraine. They were done in the 70s. They weren't even really built. They took a piece of existing trail in Kettle Moraine that went through some of the best glacial remain area, and they started that for the Ice Age Trail, and then we got our designation in 1980. So again, here's how great we are. The first three National Scenic Trails, Appalachian, Pacific Crest, and Continental Divide, the Triple Crown Trails. 1980 was North Country, which runs through Wisconsin, and Ice Age. So we were the 5th trail to be designated a National Scenic Trail. And of those 11, 8 go through multiple states, and only 3 are all in one state. Ice Age Trail, Arizona Trail, and Florida Trail. So our trail's really awesome. So now I have to get back to the slide I was at. Okay. So a couple of other things I want to touch on before I get into my hike in 1,000 Miler. So the Ice Age Trail is built, promoted, and maintained by the Ice Age Trail Alliance. It's a small nonprofit group based in Cross Plains, which is right outside of Madison. We do get a little help from the DNR and the National Park Service, but really the Ice Age Trail Alliance is the mover and the shaker. If I forget to say it, the website is very good. They have wonderful information. I've seen a lot of the websites from the other trails, and ours is very good. The Ice Age Trail passes through 31 of our 72 counties, and 60% of us live within 20 miles of the Ice Age Trail. So it is very accessible, which is what Ray was hoping. And one thing I want to mention here, most of the maintenance is done by 21 volunteer chapters. We have members from the Rock County chapter in the back here who you can visit with later. That's very important to know for many reasons. Before I got on the trail, I knew there were these volunteer chapters, and very basically, the Ice Age Trail Alliance itself does like think of it as like the queen bee. It does all the really big things, like goes to petition, lobby Congress, and it figures out where the trails are going to be. It makes easement agreements with private landowners. It plots where the trail is. It has building projects to build the trail. Then the volunteer chapters do the day-to-day grunt work, like the worker bees. They do like a lot of the maintaining of the trail, clipping the vegetation back. They paint the blazes or nail them on. They offer things like guided moonlight hikes or snowshoe hikes and things like that, many other things. I knew that going in, but I never stopped to think what that meant. And when I had first heard about the Ice Age Trail, I just kept thinking, National Scenic Trail. And I would see these pictures of people hiking on these nice trails, and I thought, this is going to be like I had a vision of like this Disney-esque thing where it's going to be this perfect little path, and everything is going to be perfectly mowed, and all the blazes are going to be perfect rectangles painted in solid yellow, and it's just going to be this glorious experience. And on the second day, I started hiking at the end of August, and after all of the growth of summer. And this was 5 or 6 years ago. The numbers of hikers, by the way, in America have just ballooned in the last 5 years. So back then, there still weren't too many people hiking it. And I ran into some stretches that were pretty overgrown. And I remember one day, I think I was dehydrated, because you can get really crabby when you're dehydrated. I was like, this is not a National Scenic Trail. This is a disgrace. There's all these wild raspberries, and I'm getting cut up. And I was having this little fit, and calmed down when I had some water. And then I ran into a volunteer the other day, and then then you start, when you really start thinking about it, it's like, oh my gosh, look how much all this vegetation is here. There's this handful of volunteers who probably have to drive 40 minutes to get to the trailhead, hike in 2, 3, 4, 5 miles with a weed whacker or saw on their shoulder, do all the work, hike back out with that saw on, drive back home. It's an enormous amount of work, and of course every inch of the trail isn't going to be perfectly mowed at any minute. And I don't want to at all imply that it's overgrown everywhere. It's not. I would say, in my experiences, 80 to 90% is in good condition, but you have to be prepared that you can run into some overgrown stuff, and it's just the way it is. And the more the people volunteer, the less we'll have overgrown trails. Anyway, keep that in mind. Our volunteers are awesome. And just to show that these are fun examples from my last 2 hikes. So this is actually a trail on the New England Trail. I had just there was a dirt path here, and I saw a blaze up here, and then it was this. And I'm like, all right, well, it wasn't too far away. I'm like, I can just stamp on it. But I couldn't, because this vegetation was some weird kind of springy bush thing, and I tried with my trekking poles to bash it away, and it just kept flying back at me. And luckily, I was with my husband, and I said, you go in front, and we'll be like a train. So I'm like, 1, 2, 3, and then we just kind of like bashed through it. So that was kind of fun. And then this, oopsie, wrong thing again with the clicker here. Then the one on the right was on the Florida Trail. This was in December at the start of their hiking season, because down in Florida, their seasons are, of course, opposite than ours. And the crews were out starting to clean up, but they just hadn't gotten to all the trails yet. And these were like these little bush tree kind of things with branches everywhere. So again, you couldn't really step on them, even though they were brittle. And you couldn't really push them aside. And it's like, man, it took me 15 minutes to go 2 feet. I was there a long time, but I did get through. All right. So.
Okay. There's a blaze somewhere in here. I don't even know how I can get through this. This is ridiculous. Okay, it's like walking on bushes and trees. There's no path. Oh. Trekking poles aren't helping. Oh my goodness. All right, this is the adventure, the glamorous side of hiking.
Okay, sorry. I've never been able to get that video clip to play. So let's see if this...
Okay, don't hike this section of the trail yet, because it's really hard to get over this. I think I'm going to be out here till, I don't know, midnight. This is the western part of Apalachicola Forest, west of Bradwell Bay. And I'm taking probably inches every minute, over and out.
So yeah, sometimes that's your adventure for the day. Okay, and I always forget the bifurcation. I always say, I'm going to come to this later, and then I forget, so I had to put this slide in. So the bifurcation is this fun little bubble here. The base down in the southern portion is Devil's Lake State Park, and the top part is a rest station wayside on I-39 in Coloma, if anyone's familiar with that stretch of the highway. So the bifurcation is a fight. Can you imagine people fighting? The terminal moraine actually is right in the middle. And when the people who were planning the Ice Age Trail were trying to come up with their route to present to Congress for approval in the National Park Service, they couldn't agree. One group of people said, hey, I've got a great idea. Instead of following the terminal moraine here, let's go just to the east, because then we can take in John Muir's boyhood home and Alda Leopold's shack. And Alda Leopold and John Muir were major environmentalists in the 20th century. The other side said, oh, that's a great idea, but we have a better one. Let's actually move it west of the terminal moraine, because then we can take in the remnants of Glacial Lake, Wisconsin. So Glacial Lake, Wisconsin was a major glacial feature, but it happened to be just outside the terminal moraine. And what it was as a river was flowing on the glacier and a tongue of ice moved, it bumped into the Baraboo Hills, which were 1 to 2 billion year old quartzite hills near Devil's Lake. And so when that ice lobe hit the Baraboo Hills, it stopped up that river into glacial Lake Wisconsin. And scientists believe it was the size of 3 or 4 Lake Winnebagos, and that when it drained, when it started warming up, that water, all that water, flowed out in as little as 3 or 4 days, and that's what chiseled the dells in Wisconsin Dells. So that side said, no, we gotta have people see glacial Lake Wisconsin. So they fought and fought and fought, and finally went to the National Park Service and said, you decide, which should we do? And the National Park Service said, we're not getting involved in your spat, but what we'll do for you is create something called official side trails. So every national scenic trail can designate official side trails. On our trail, they're blazed white. And the National Park Service said, okay, you're welcome, goodbye. So what do you think happened? The east side said, great, our side is the official trail, your side is the official side trail. And the west side backers said, oh no, you've got it backwards. So they kept fighting and fighting again, and somewhere along the way, apparently the Congress or the National Park Service didn't force them to pick one. So it's just been, you can hike, if you want to say you hike the whole Ice Age Trail, you don't have to hike both sides, you just pick one side or the other. Both of them are mostly connecting road routes today. One side's about 70 miles east, the west is about 80. And the Ice Age Trail Alliance told me that in the not too distant future, they are hoping to designate one as the official trail and the other the side trail. They didn't tell me which way they were leaning. I don't even know if they know yet. So that's the bifurcation. All right. So, okay, now I get to me. So why did I decide to hike 1,100 miles? It sounds kind of crazy. Well, in 2007, a friend of mine named Jason Dorgan, a running friend of mine, decided he was going to raise money for the Ice Age Trail Alliance. He's a huge Ice Age Trail backer, and he's a big ultra-distance runner. So he thought he would set a speed record on the trail, because in long-distance running circles and in long-distance trail, the world of long-distance trails, you have people do that. You might have read about, there's been a lot of record breaking on the Appalachian Trail for these speed records. Well, no one had tried to set a speed record on the Ice Age Trail, so Jason thought, I'm going to do it. Now, I was getting some emails about his through run, as he called it, in 2007, but I didn't pay attention because my oldest child was graduating high school, and it was April and May, and I was busy with all that and trying to get him ready for college. So I knew he was running around the state. I just didn't know what he was doing. 2009, 2 years after that, I still know nothing about the Ice Age Trail. I hear about this Camino de Santiago in Spain, which some of you might know. So I went over there and fell in love with this trail, and how much fun is it to follow yellow arrows through the countryside, and this is so awesome. And I wrote all sorts of articles and wrote a guidebook, and I was in love with this Camino. Then, December 2012. So now it's 5 years after Jason finished his through run. I'm on a group run with him, and he happens to be next to me, and he starts talking about the Ice Age Trail. And I said, you know, I'm embarrassed to say I really didn't know what you were doing back then. Tell me about this trail. So he starts telling me what the Ice Age Trail is, and my jaw drops to the floor, because I'm thinking, I'm running over to Spain in love with this Camino, and you mean to tell me we have a path twice as long in my own state, and I've never heard of it, and I'm a travel writer? I thought it was just crazy. So I went home that night, still dressed in my sweaty clothes, and started looking all over the Ice Age Trail Alliance's website. And I started seeing that at the time, this is, again, 2012, there had only been about 70-some people who had either through hiked, which is hiking the trail in one attempt, or section hikes, so hiking it in pieces, any order, as long as it takes you. Only 70-some, and only 20-some had through hiked it. And I start looking at the names of the through hikers, and it's, because I'm like, I really want to through hike this. And it's all male, 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 male. So all of a sudden it's like, ooh, I could become the first female to through hike the Ice Age Trail. And then I found a woman's name. It's like, darn. Then it's like, okay, I could be number 2 or 3. You know, first 3 women. There was a second woman and a third woman, and then the name stopped. It's like, fourth woman's not that exciting. But then I thought, ooh, bing. Hey, those 3 women were not trying to set a speed record. And even though I was older at the time, in my 50s, and most people who do this stuff are younger than that for sure, and I knew I couldn't do, Jason, by the way, did it in 48 miles a day. Knew I couldn't do that. I know. But I'm like, I think I could do, from my time in Spain, when I did try to run some of the trail just to save money so I wouldn't have to, couldn't afford to be away that long, I thought, I know I can run some of it, so I think I could do about 30 miles a day. And then I could have the women's speed record, which would be kind of fun because I'm older. And then I could also write a bunch of stories about the trail because I can't really take, even going 30 miles a day, that would take me 5 to 6 weeks. I can't take that much time away from home. But since nobody's heard of this trail, then, or not many people, I know I can sell stories on it. And that was my plan, and that's what I did. I started polling everyone, all my editors. No one had heard of this trail. I got a boatload of assignments on it, including one for a magazine called Trail Runner on how when you're older and can't really win races anymore because you're too old, if you find something really like niche-y and novel, you can still like win. So that was mine, like, here's this trail no one knows about and no one's tried to set a speed record, so I'll do it right now. So that was what I decided to do and why I decided to do that. So what was my journey like? Well, first of all, I did whatever Jason told me to do because I'm like, you did it in an incredible 22 days. Tell me what to do. And he said, don't camp because you want to be in a comfortable lodging at night. You want to be able to soak your legs, whatever. Have somebody with you all the time. I didn't think I needed that because I didn't in Spain. But he said, you want somebody who's going to drop you off in the morning where you left off. Be at every trail crossing with a car full of goodies to say, do you need water? Do you need dry shoes, socks, Band-Aids, whatever? And then whisk you back to your motel or friend's house or family member's house, whatever, at the end of the day. Trekking poles, which I can talk about later, they're wonderful. I like to have compression socks because I don't like to hike in pants. I get too hot. And then compression socks keep the burrs and some of the scratchy things off of you. Compression sleeves are great too for when it's cool in the morning and then hotter in the day and cool at night. You can roll them up and down. So that are some of the things I had when I started out. And this was just so ironic too. I don't know, when I was learning about these trails and everything, I don't know what I was thinking. I thought they would be perfectly clipped, like I'd be in the Walt Disney Trail. And then I also thought, I love the fall and I hate hot weather. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to start end of August, early September. I'll start up north because everyone knows it's cold up north. So I'll be in all the northern parts when it's early September, so it'll be nice and cool there. And then by the time I come down to Janesville, which is the southernmost part when it's going to be hot, it'll be the 3rd week of September, so then it will be cool here too. And then I'll just be going up north to Sturgeon Bay, and then it's going to be just this feast of the colors changing before my eyes. Up north they start sooner, so I'll get all the colors changing in September, early September, and it's going to be gorgeous. Well, this first day it was 95 degrees with about 1,000,000% humidity. I changed everything I had on, including my shoes, 3 full times that day because the sweat was just dripping off of me. It was gross. And it was in the 90s for over a week, the first week. Then it got into the 80s for 2 weeks, and then it got into the upper 70s by the end of September, which was still pretty hot when you're running all day. And I think I saw like 1 red leaf. And I was like, oh, it's so beautiful. I'm taking pictures. And as soon as I finished, the temperatures dropped and all the leaves changed colors when I was back in my office, not looking out the window at one tree. It's like, oh, but I still had a marvelous time. It truly changed my life, my experience here. Some of the things I saw, well, there's a lot of different trail signage out there. The Ice Age Trail Alliance today is trying to standardize all the signage. Our signature blaze is a yellow blaze, and then we also have a woolly mammoth I'll show you in a minute in our sign. But in the early days, like most trails did, they signed this thing with whatever they could find. And this guy here was a freebie, I'm told, from the National Park Service. It's like 2-inch by 2-inch, and it looks kind of distinct here, but believe me, that can be very camouflaged when you're on the trail, especially if you're starting when there's been a lot of growth like I did. And I remember one time I went back and forth on this trail for 45 minutes trying to find where I needed to turn because the sign like this was covered with vegetation. This one is an Ice Age Trail sign, and one of the older ones as well. And that was a funny story too. They're all funny now. They weren't funny when I was out there. So I saw this on the first day. I'm like, all right, that's another way they blaze it. So then like the 3rd day, I see the same kind of sign, only it's long and rectangular. I'm like, that's all I see. It must be the sign. And I promptly got lost, and I found out later those are ATV signs. I had no idea of the vast ATV culture in our state. You learn a lot, by the way, when you're hiking this trail. So yeah, there's ATV stuff is everywhere, especially in the northern half of the state. And now I know what their signs are. So here's one of our more traditional blazes. This is an old Ice Age trail sign. Now it's got the woolly mammoth. You don't usually see arrows. They're mostly just the blaze, but every once in a while you will see an arrow painted. Here's our official sign with our nice woolly mammoth. One thing I love about the Ice Age Trail, now that I've been hiking other trails around the nation, is we name our segments. And they have these big, nice wooden signs on each end of the segment. And you might not quite understand it unless you're planning a hike or having somebody shuttle you or whatever, but it's really nice to be able to say, I'm going to hike the Dunes segment and the Mishicot segment and the Manitowoc segment or whatever. Then to look at a map on the other trails, it's just like, well, I'm hiking from this dot to this dot. And sometimes they don't even show the names of the roads on the maps and things like that. So this is really nice. I appreciate that quite a bit. One thing that I loved about the Ice Age Trail, another thing I should say, is it goes through a wide variety of landscapes. If any of you read the book A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson about the Appalachian Trail or talked to people who hiked it, they often describe that as a tunnel of green. They said it's beautiful, but you're just in the woods a lot. It's just a lot of the woods. What I found and what other people have told me about the Ice Age Trail that are coming here from other states is they said, we really loved it because it's not just all woods. So you do have the woods, of course, and you have beautiful wildflowers, which most places have. But you also have, like here, beautiful prairie land. You get some pine forests. You get beautiful glacial lakes. A lot of trails, it's really a novelty if you come upon a body of water and you're just like, oh my gosh, taking all these pictures. We have so many glacial lakes. They're just gorgeous. Pine forests, I love, they're one of my favorite to walk through. Farm fields, this photo does not do this justice. This was one of my very favorite moments on the trail. I popped out of the woods at the top of this farm field, and the farmer is a big supporter here of the Ice Age Trail, and he's mowed this serpentine path down. And you can see here, there's like, it's edged in these grasses. And it just was a feeling like, you know, you're a bride walking down the aisle or you're royalty because you're going down this path and you've got these little grasses waving and you're going down like this, downhill. And it was just, it really kind of caught my heart. And connecting road routes. I've had some people say, well, why would I want to hike a trail that's not finished? Well, the connecting roads take you past just some beautiful landscape. For the most part, I would say 95% of them are quiet roads. It's not like they have you walking along state highways or interstates or things like that. You see beautiful scenery. One of my favorite experiences was one morning I heard singing. And I'm like, I was on a connecting road route. And it's like, what am I hearing? Singing. And then I heard bells. And then I heard clip-clopping. I'm like, what is this? And an Amish boy was driving up just singing at the top of his lungs. And the bells were jangling. And it was just so magical. We also have Lake Michigan. The North Country Trail goes by some of the Great Lakes, but it's just the North Country Trail and us, and I love Lake Michigan, and you get to walk. It's 2 miles of a beach walk. It's spectacular. Now, Ice Age Trail, we know it's all about the Ice Age, the glacial remains. I will be honest, there's descriptions of all the things that you can see, the different glacial formations. A lot of the times I couldn't recognize them. I would have needed to go on one of the guided hikes that the chapters provide, but I was able to spot a few. So one of them was potholes. So a pothole happens when you have a river under a glacier. There's rivers all over glaciers. And you get an eddy, and it picks up a stone, and it just swirls it around, and it just drills a hole in the earth. That's called a pothole. And sometimes the stone gets caught in there and swirls around until it gets like a bowling ball, and that's called a grindstone. So the only potholes in the whole trail are in Interstate State Park when you start off. It's on the pothole trail as the start of the from the western terminus. So I got to see those. Those are called, that big stone is an erratic. So an erratic is any piece of rock that the glacier picks up and drags way far away and then just drops. So it can be a stone or it can be a boulder. Now, if you see a stone in the woods, you're not going to pick it up and go, oh, I wonder if this is an erratic, because, you know, how in the world did you know? But if you see a rock like that in the middle of the woods, you can almost bet that that was dumped there by the glacier. And that's so fun once you realize what you're seeing, to see them in farm fields or something like that. And there are so many of them on the trail. But my favorite feature at all that I learned to identify is called an esker. Eskers, again, have to do with rivers. So when you think about the glacier, 1 to 2 miles of ice above your head, and someone says to you, can you picture that? Can you picture what that glacier was like? And you're like, well, yeah, I guess I'd be really high up there. I can kind of figure that was really big. I know a mile is long, 2 miles is really long. But you can't really get a sense of it until you come upon an esker. So think of that 1 to 2 miles of ice, and at the very bottom is a river. So what's a river in the grand scheme of 1 mile or 2 miles of ice? It's nothing. Well, at the bottom of that river, under all that ice, it builds sediment. You're always dredging rivers and things. Well, when all the ice melts away, and when that river flows away, that mound of dirt is left, and that's an esker. Now, eskers can be 30, 60 feet tall. They're huge. And you climb up on them, and this is not a good photo, but you climb on the top, and you're huffing and puffing and sweating, and these sides are kind of, it's not like falling off a cliff or anything, but these sides are steeply pitched, and you wouldn't want to start rolling down one. And one day I was huffing and puffing up one of these eskers, because there's several that you hike on the trail, just sweating, and I don't know how long it took me. And all of a sudden, it just hit me. I was like, my gosh, look how hard it was to climb this thing. Look how much I'm sweating. And this was like a grain of sand in a sand dune. That thing was the the most insignificant part of that glacier. And look how big it is. And that was the first time I really could get some feeling of how massive those glaciers must have been. So I love eskers for that reason. Now, the trail, there's funny things all over the trail. People would always say to me, Melanie, I could never do that because I'd get so bored. Like, what do you think about all day? And you're out by yourself, and it's got to be so boring. No, it was not, because you're either seeing beautiful sights or you're seeing silly things. They're just kind of all over. So I don't know why somebody felt the need to mark how many feet above sea level. It's not the tallest point in the state. It's getting close. I love this mermaid. There's this flowing well maybe you guys know of it. It's east of here by Whitewater. There's a sign that says it was hand dug by some guy in the 1850s. It's been flowing like this for every year since. People are driving up in their cars and pulling out jugs and getting the water, and it's wonderful water. Oh, and I have to tell a quick story about this. So we talked before about these signs, and they're at the ends of every segment. So I had heard all sorts of horror stories from people hiking toward me about the Kettle Bowl. And, you're going to get lost, everyone gets lost. And I'm like, I really don't want to get lost, because all the guys saying that, all the hikers were meant to, and I'm like, I want to be the one that conquers the Kettle Bowl. So I'm in the Kettle Bowl. First few miles are on this wide ski trail. I'm like, this is really easy. I don't know why these guys are getting lost. And I had talked to the chapter chair the day before, and he was telling me everyone likes the sign. They think bears have been clawing at it or something, but it's just porcupines that like the salts in the resin or something like that. So I see this sign, and I'm like, that's a sign Joe told me about. Stop and take pictures, and while I'm stopped, I might as well eat something, might as well drink something. And I'm just about to start on this nice, wide hiking trail when this catches my eye. And I'm like, wow, that looks like one of those little arrow signs that I showed you guys before, the 2 by 2 inch ones. I wonder what that is. So I go behind this, and sure enough, it's a little arrow pointing to the big trail I'm on, which meant that I was supposed to turn here. This is a trail, which I couldn't see because it was overgrown. I was supposed to turn here, and the people coming from the other direction would be coming up here and see that little sign and say, turn on this big wide trail. And then I realized when I was giving these presentations, well, first of all, I always wondered why there was this big wooden sign in the middle of the trail, because every single other sign is at the start and end of a segment, never in the middle. And then I noticed this is actually a blaze on here, because they're usually brown. It's like a big sign going like, hello, hello, like heads up, you need to turn here. But this also shows sometimes how trails can be overgrown. But lest anyone gets nervous about hiking today, you will never get lost like I did, because now there is something out that didn't exist in 2012 or 2013 when I was out there called Mammoth Tracks. And it's an app. I used one on the Florida Trail, And besides containing all the information in the guidebook in app form, it also has this wonderful little mapping feature that you don't need cell service, you don't need Wi-Fi to use. You just turn it on and you're a little arrow, and the trail's a red line, I think. And so if you are looking around and you don't know where to go, which way to go, or if you're on the trail, you suddenly don't see blazes, you can just turn the thing on and you can look and go like, oh, it shows the trail is to the right of me. So you turn and the little arrow goes, and then you just walk until the arrow matches up with the trail, and then you know where you are. So I use that on the Florida Trail quite a bit. So now if I would get that app, because there's things like we said before, it can be overgrown, or sometimes loggers come through and blazes get cut down or get blown down in weather or whatever. So just get that app if you don't like the idea of maybe getting a little lost at times. Tisch Mills is a fun spot. They have fun signs. Let's see. Just more things that you never know what you're going to see. Oh, I have to say one thing about this creepy wooden man, which is actually kind of cute. But does anyone remember that movie, The Blair Witch Project from the? Okay, so I saw this guy, and it's kind of crudely created. So like his grin is like, and it's like, oh, this is kind of weird but fun, haha, fun. But then the trail, so you're in this big prairie, but then it goes into these woods, and all of a sudden the path is like super tightly twisting. And I was coming around a corner, and all of a sudden there's like a little kid in a swing hanging, like wooden, like this, only small size, a little kid in a swing hanging from the branches, like right in my face, and it had like, the fun. And then I went around the trail again, and then there was another kid like hanging from monkey bars just in the, and all I could think of was that scene in the Blair Witch Project where the sticks are tied together at the end and hanging from the trees. So I was like, it was actually kind of funny. This is a wood duck nest. I had no idea what that was until when I was giving a book talk in Chicago, of all places, some man there knew what it was. Ducks hatch in these things and walk. They have webbing on the bottoms of their feet, and they walk down the trunk of the tree or something. So you never know what you're going to see. Then there's signs. People always have silly signs, more signs. This is by Janesville, Belly Acres. It's west of here, I think. I don't know if it's on County A. I like that one. We have an arsenic contamination zone. Who knew? I did not. Skulls, and this is this woolly mammoth is east of here in Milton, I think, or Janesville to Milton segment. So, okay, why write a book? My plan the first time around was to write these articles, and that was it. And how many people have read Cheryl Strayed's book, Wild? Okay, maybe half of you. So that's really not so much a book about hiking as it is about the author's, the death of her mother and how she kind of went off the rails and was doing a lot of sketchy things. So I didn't know nothing about the book other than people kept texting me while I was hiking going, I've read this great book, Wild. You've got to read it and write one. You're going to be the Cheryl Strayed of the Ice Age Trail. I'm like, all right, I don't think I'll write a book, but sure, I'll read the book. And so the day I got home, the very day, a woman handed me the book and said, you read this, you're going to be the Cheryl Strayed of the Ice Age Trail. I'm like, all right. And I start reading it. It's like, that did not happen to me. That's not what I was doing in my tent. No, I didn't have a tent. But no, I was like, no. But anyway, so I had no idea, no intention of writing a book. But I had become changed. And I think everyone I've talked to that's hiked a long-distance trail, it's just a transformative experience. It's so hard to explain what it's like. But it's everything the researchers say about being, stress-free. And one thing, too, that we today, with all of our gadgets and fast-paced society and endless news and things, we never have time with ourselves and our own thoughts. We don't. We might think we do, but you really don't. When you're hiking by yourself all those days, it's just so, again, it's just so hard to articulate. But I really just fell in love with this, and I thought everyone needs to know, at least in Wisconsin, about this Ice Age Trail and elsewhere. And I thought, and I had a lot of funny and interesting experiences, but not enough for a whole book. But then one day I just woke up and it was like, you know what? This does not have to be just about me, because I ran into 5 different people out there, and they had very interesting stories about why they were out there hiking and what their experiences were. And I thought maybe I could find the first guy to have thru-hiked it, because I knew he did it back in 1979, and the trail was barely a trail. Who would even think of thru-hiking it? And maybe I can find some other interesting people. And then the thing that pushed me over the edge was there was a program that started called Warrior Hike. Now it's called Warrior Expeditions, but a man started this, a combat veteran, to match military combat veterans with long-distance trails as a means of therapy. And it's since morphed into Warrior Expeditions, and they offer a bike and a paddle. And the Ice Age Trail had just signed on to have its first 2 warrior hiker participants, and they were women, and one of them agreed to talk with me. So I thought, oh, that would be an interesting story too. So then I thought, I think all of that combined, my hike can just be the thread that ties it all together, and I can weave in these other people and stories, and I think that would be an interesting book. And that would be useful because it would show people like different ways to hike the trail too. So that was why I decided to write the book. So because I always like to know if people are real in a book, I always like to know what they look like. I put some pictures in. So here's Jim Stadecker. He's, I think, a year or 2 older than me. He was the guy that hiked it the first time. His story is very interesting because basically the trail didn't even exist, as I said. I think there were 250 miles of trail maybe on the ground. The rest was all, he was hiking where they had planned. They thought they wanted to put land, so he was kind of almost doing like a reconnaissance mission for the Ice Age Trail Alliance, his predecessor, to see where the trail would go. This young man is one of those stereotypical people who's like, I don't know what to do with my life, and I think if I hike a million miles, well, 1,000 miles, I can maybe figure it out. So he has a great story, very unprepared but roll with the flow kind of guy. These 2 guys, Papa Bear and Hiking Dude, they're great. They have a great story as well. And Hiking Dude, by the way, he and his son are the ones that hiked that Pacific Northwest Trail and told me there's no blazes on it. He has this incredible website. It's just hikingdude.com. He lists everything for every hike down to the gnat's eyelash. You know, he tells you everything he packed, how much it weighs, where he bought it, how much it cost, how many steps he took every day. Then he has a regular like diary blog thing, then photos, and it's just, but you can learn a lot. I learned a lot from him. This is Jason, who still has the trail record. I think a couple people have flirted with breaking it, men anyway, never have. Last year, maybe 2 years ago now, a woman named Annie Weiss, was going to try and break both of our records, and she was trying to go 60 to 65 miles a day and got infections in her legs and had to drop out. I think she's going to try again and just try to go faster than me, and I think she's going to be starting soon, so that'll be fun to watch. Let's see. Here's Jenny Heiss. She was one of the warrior hikers. She let me in on her hike, so that was enjoyable. And this is Sean Gobin, who started the program. He was a wonderful gentleman too, and this program is just going gangbusters. They only have, unfortunately, the ability to put about 40 veterans on the trail every year, different trails. It's not just the Ice Age Trail. And they're now getting like 400 some applicants a year. So people are, and they're having very good results. The veterans are reporting positive experiences, and they're doing studies at some university in Georgia, I think, just to track and see what it's like. Quick note about DOTS and also about the Ice Age Trail Alliance Conference. So when I was going to do planning my hike, it took about 9 months to plan, Jason Dorgan told me, go to the Ice Age Trail Alliance's annual conference because they have a hiker panel there where everyone who finished the trail that year talks about their experiences, and you can pick up some tips. So I'm like, all right, sounds good. So I went to the conference, and by the way, if you have any interest in the trail, I highly recommend it. It's 4 days, but you can go for 1 hour or 1 day or 3 days or whatever you want. You make wonderful friends, and you learn a lot. But anyway, I sat in on this hiker panel, and this one guy starts talking about how bad the ticks are. Now, my parents were from Chicago, both of them born and raised. I was born, all my siblings were born in Chicago. We moved here when I was 8, but we didn't do we did big city things like museums and stuff. We didn't do too much in the outdoors because that's not what my parents knew. So I didn't know much about ticks until I was an adult, and I had never had one on me. I didn't know anything about tick checks. But anyway, he starts talking about how his arms were covered, and he would go like wipe them off like this, hundreds, and then they'd be covered again. And so he finally would hike all day with all these ticks on him and just wait till the end of the day to get them off. So as he's talking, my palms are starting to sweat, and I'm sweating on my forehead, and I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna write all these editors back. I'm just gonna email them all and say I'm canceling, I'm not doing this. I don't care if I see a bear, I don't care if I see a snake, I don't care about anything, but I can't do this. I don't care if a spider crawls on me, but I'm not having ticks like that. And then thankfully, somebody said tick season is largely over by July or August. And it was like, thank God. But they also told me about dots. Everyone in the room was talking about dots. I'm like, what's dots? It's a basement tavern. It was started in the 40s in a woman's basement right off of the Ice Age Trail. And they're like, you have to have a beer at Dots. Everyone on the Ice Age Trail goes to Dots for a beer. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to have a beer at Dots. I can't wait. So it was like the umpteenth millionth day of hot weather. And I'm like, all right, the good thing is that beer is going to taste really good. So we get to Dots. It's like 1:40. It's like perfect time. I'm just really could use a cold beer. We walk there. I yank on the door, and it's locked. And then a sign says Dots opens at like 4 or something, and it was like, oh, no. But someone found, there were 2 people helping me that day, and one of them said, here's this beer I think your husband left in the car, your car over the last time he was here. And so I'm like, I just took a picture of myself. I just chugged, I had a big sip, and it was kind of warm and gross, and I thought this is probably not a wise idea. But I could say I had a beer at Dots. It's called Basco. It's south of Madison in Dane County. And then, yes, I did it. I finished the trail in one piece. I did have the record. And I would now love to take questions from all of you. Oh, come on.
Yes. The Mammoth Tracks app
Yes.
for either Android or iPhone?
I believe the Mammoth Tracks app, yes, is for Android or iPhone.
And you just go to the Play Store or the iPhone store?
Yeah, and it's on the Ice Age Trail Alliance website as well. You can find it there. It's also, I think the software or something is made by some company called Guthooks, Guthooks. When I was on the Florida Trail with all these seasoned hikers, everyone kept talking about Guthooks. Don't you have Guthooks? Don't you have Guthooks? I'm like, no, I have an app called the Florida Trail. They're like, that's Guthooks. So I Googled it, and there's a company called Guthooks that you can find the Mammoth Tracks on there as well, and apps for other trails. Well, you have to buy the Florida one and everything.
You have to buy each trail
Yes.
separately?
Yes, you buy each trail separately. Yes.
What's the name of the trail in Spain again? Camino de
Santiago.
It is Santiago.
Yes.
Okay.
How long ago did you do that?
I did it many times between 2009 and 2014, and then I got hooked on the Ice Age Trail, and I haven't been back. Oh, sorry.
How long did it take you for the Ice Age Trail?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't think I said. It was 36 days, and then I did it another time to get more information for the book, and did it in 34. So it was, I think, like 32 miles a day, something like that. Yes.
You ever walked it?
Oh yeah. No. Well, that's a good point, because when people say they did, running, like Jason, who set the record, estimates he actually was running 60% of the time and walking 40% of the time. And as you'll read in the book, if you haven't read it yet, if you read his diary, he was barely, his pace is probably a, 10-minute mile, 12-minute mile, and he would be running very small amounts at a time. It wasn't like he would run 5 miles and walk. And I know with me, I would say my figures are probably opposite. I was probably only running 40% of the time and walking 60% and running super slowly, and I might run to that door and then walk the same. You know what I mean? So it's a kind of a misnomer to talk about running the trail, because people think you're just out there pounding miles, and no one can do that. Yeah, so all of these people, even in a 100-mile race, for example, or 50-mile race, when you hear people doing that, I do a lot of running, and I was really surprised the first time I learned that even in those races, conventional wisdom says you walk up every hill because you'll burn so much more energy trying to run up. So you're doing a lot of walking. And I took hundreds of pictures, so I was enjoying it. Yeah. Yes?
What's your experience with wildlife?
That's a great question. People always wonder, especially in Wisconsin, about bears. And I actually did not see any bears while I was on the trail. My husband saw one once, but it was gone. He was walking in to meet me. It was gone by the time we walked back. And I saw 3 bears once on the road when we were driving back to our motel. But I have a great story. about my experience with bears in the Florida Trail, of all places, where you're more worried about alligators. And I guess I forgot about Gentle Ben, but they have a lot of, I've seen, I don't know, even know how many, 6, 8 bears on the Florida Trail, very close to me. And they all, like you hear, wild animals don't want to be around you, just like you don't want to be around them. You see one, the minute you see them, they just fly. But when I was hiking the Florida Trail, I went down 4 different times last year. I was at the end of like a 2.5-week segment, section of the trail. I had a friend who was from Madison with me that I knew from up here, but who lives in Florida now, and she would meet me and hike with me a few days, and she wasn't with me anymore. It was the last day. Rain was supposed to come, a huge storm. They had been telling me it's going to start like at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. I could feel the temperature drop about 10 degrees, and I just started getting some really bad tendonitis on my legs, so I'm kind of limping. It's like, oh, thank goodness the storm isn't here yet. I reached the point where it was a mile access trail to the parking lot and visitor center where my car was. I'm like, oh, thank goodness. So I turn off the trail, and I look, and what do I see down there but not just a bear, a mama and 2 babies. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this was March. So, I'm like, this is the worst thing. But the worst thing, even worse than seeing them, was they were just standing there. And it's like, well, I know they can see me and hear me and smell me. Why are they not running away? So I call my friend, who's like 5 hours away in Florida, because Florida's a really long, narrow state. And I don't know why I called her, because what could she do? But I just felt better knowing she was physically in the state of Florida. So I'm like, Jody, oh my God, there's a mama bear and cubs, and they're not moving, and I know they can see me and hear me and smell me, and I have tendonitis, and it's about to storm, and I need to pack my bags, and my flight is tomorrow morning, and I don't know what to do, and I'm just hysterical. And then there's this big pause, and she says, hang up the phone and dial 911. And I'm like, I can't dial 911 and say I went for a hike in the woods and I see a bear. And then there's another pause, and she said, but it's a real emergency. So then luckily I see on the map I'm holding, it has a number for the visitor center. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to call the visitor center. So I call the visitor center. Well, it was like 4:50, and those places usually close at 4:30, so no one answers. So I call her, Judy, all right, the bears walked off the trail, but they sauntered off the trail. They didn't run off, and the visitor center's closed, and I have to get to my car, so stay on the line. And if I scream, you hang up and call 911. So I'm starting to walk, thinking she's going to be saying oh, remember the time in Madison when we did that, try to distract me. But I hear, brr, brr, she's on her laptop. And then she said, if a black bear attacks, you must fight back. She starts reading this whole thing, and it's like, it's the grizzly bears, the ones where you can play dead, but you have to fight back. And, try to draw yourself up large and put your trekking poles over your, she's saying all the time, I'm like, well, don't do it like this. But I did get past the spot. Nothing popped out of the bushes at me. But it was just so ironic to have that experience in Florida, of all places, and not on the Ice Age Trail. So, yes?
Can you tell a little bit about some problems that you have with your feet? You just mentioned tendonitis, but I read your book and...
Yeah, there's just, it's funny. You can take all the precautions and you can do everything right, and you just never know what you're going to get. So I had, the wicking socks. I changed my shoes a lot. Sometimes I got tons of blisters, and I couldn't figure out why. Changing shoes and everything. Other times on the trail, when I did it the second time, I didn't have anywhere nearly as many. I did have some problems with foot infection like that Annie had. I don't think we had the same type. But I learned it's not uncommon, because a lot of, we have bacteria all over our bodies, and of course there can be bacteria in puddles and things like that. And if you get any kind of a cut in your skin, and then bacteria gets in, and it's, that can be a problem. It's random, though. I mean, you don't know why that's going to happen sometimes and why it doesn't other times. But yeah, you just have to be, I've talked to some other long distance hikers, and you really have to know something's going to go wrong every day, and not always catastrophically wrong, but you might take a wrong turn here, or you might fall down and bang your knee, or so you just have to roll with it. But it's always, in a weird way, sometimes it's the days that are really hard. When you finally are finished, instead of being like, you might be mad if you first fall, but when you finish the day, it's like, oh yeah, I did that. I got over that really, that stuff you saw me trying to fight through. It's like, yeah, I got through that all by myself. And that was pretty cool. So, you know, what's that saying? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger or something. It kind of is, so.
So what is your mindset, though, about, like, conquering the pain of that? I mean, because reading your book, I mean, you hiked. I would think it would be painful. How would you get up in the morning?
Yeah,
not in pain in the morning? Or?
Well, I mean, that's not terrible pain, but yeah, you'd get up and I'd start walking and it's like my feet are killing me. How in the world am I going to hike? But it's weird because by the time, and I was mostly, again, at people's homes that I knew or like motels, you know, you'd shuffle to the breakfast bar and you're limped, or I should say at the breakfast bar. You're like, how in the world am I going to be hiking 30 miles? But by the time, I mean, it's just kind of like you break them in. And by the time I'd get all dressed, have my breakfast, and we get to the trail and I'd start walking, I'd be fine. And then it was odd too, because the minute you stop for the day and get in the car, and then when you go to get out, it's like, like, how am I gonna get into the hotel again? It's just a weird thing. So yeah, I mean, when I'd first wake up, I always wanted more sleep because it's obviously exhausting, and I probably should have had, I don't know, 9 or 10 hours a night, and I never got that. But you know, you get up and it's like, I don't want to get out of bed, but then you just do, and like I said, within 15, 20 minutes, I would always be like, yay, I can't wait to see what I'm going to see today. At the start of every day, yeah. And then toward the end of every day, when it was like, you knew you had like an hour or 2 hours left, you're like, I really want this day to be over because I'm just ready to like eat food and not be walking.
Were you wearing hiking boots or running shoes?
I had a combination. I would say I mostly use running shoes, and actually even for trails like the Pacific Crest, people are moving more and more toward more of a athletic type shoe and less to the boots. But really it's whatever works for you. I mean, it really has to be what works for you. I saw people hiking in those Vibram 5 toes or whatever they're called, 10 toes, I don't know. And you know, people one day I had to go in keen sandals like that. I had a blister that was on the side that was just killing me, and all the shoes rubbing on it, and I had a pair like that, and just the way that where the cutout was where that blister was, and I thought, but I've never worn these for 30 miles. I mean, I don't know if it's going to work, but they did. And it was just enough. The next day I was able to put my regular shoes on again. If you can switch your shoes a lot, which I was able to do with having access to a car where you could put everything and anything in there, that was what was nice, because some days, depending on where the blisters were, one pair of shoes would feel better than another. So I'm going to do some more hiking next year where I'll be more doing the camping and all that, where you have your one pair of shoes and that's it. So that'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Can you recommend a brand of shoes that you found useful for you?
Well, I mean, hiking shoes or running shoes or? Not really, because I honestly can't remember what I had, and they change so often too. Like if you have Sauconys one year, now they just change them. It seems like 3 times a year. Maybe that brand suddenly doesn't work for you anymore, and then New Balance does or something like that. So, and again, it's really your own feet. I could have a shoe that works wonderfully for me, and you could buy it, and it could be terrible for you. Yes.
Did you already set up like your shuttles and your start and your end of the day, or did you use any trail angels or?
Yeah, the first time I had people with me all the time, and I didn't, so I did not use any trail angels. And that's another thing I want to stress again too, how awesome the trail angels are. And for those of you who don't know what a trail angel is, it's somebody simply who helps out hikers on a trail, and they can do anything they feel comfortable with. So someone might volunteer to shuttle hikers on and off. Someone might say, I would have hikers at my house, or I'd bring them a meal or whatever. And you don't have to be doing a full 1,000-mile through hike. If let's say you want to hike for 4 days, you want to drop your car, hike for 4 days, and get a shuttle back to your car. There are people who are willing to do that if they're available. And so you just contact the Ice Age Trail Alliance or your chapter chair and ask if there's somebody in the area that's willing to do that. And so the first time, back to your question as to whether I used them or not, I didn't, because I didn't need to. Now the second time I through hiked it, I had some holes in my schedule where I didn't have anyone that could be with me the whole day, so I did need to use them. And They're wonderful because not only is, well, obviously it's helpful if you have no one there and there's no taxi service in the area, but they know so much about the trail in the area. So as they're shuttling you, you get to learn a lot about, you know, the history of their particular segment and their chapter and things like that. So I would highly recommend tapping into them. And it is nice, you know, they're doing it as volunteers, but it is customary and nice to offer some money for gas. Some people really need the money. Other people will turn around and say, I'm going to donate this, or you donate it to the Ice Age Trail Alliance or to our chapter or something like that to go toward maintenance and, you know, everything else. Yes?
Are there any segments on the trail that would be handicapped accessible?
There might be a few because the trail does go through a lot of cities and towns along the way. So like Janesville, for example, it goes a lot on recreational trails that would be accessible for people in wheelchairs. I know it goes through Heartland, it goes through Manitowoc, Mishicot. If on actual trail, I'm not positive. Yeah, so I'm not positive about that. Yes?
What would be some advice you might have for someone who's more of a hobbyist level hiker, maybe 5 to 7 miles being the max, who wants to work towards these bigger hikes?
Great point. So if everyone didn't hear the question, how about somebody who's more of a hobbyist who doesn't hike that many miles? Another great thing about the Ice Age Trail is I can find a segment and section and match to anyone's level or ability. So yes, there are plenty of sections that are very short. I don't know the shortest one offhand, but mile or 1 point some miles. So very doable. You can string together a couple of short segments. And if you're someone who says, well, this all sounds fine and good, Melanie, but I don't want to be in some Northwoods outpost where, you know, no one's around and whatever, I'm not comfortable with that. There are plenty of places the trail runs through, like in the beautiful Arboretum here. That's short, and it's, you know, there's a lot of people there. Or it runs through Kettle Moraine and a lot of state forests, county forests, where you'll find a lot of other people. And so really you can get anything from basically walking through Janesville on a recreational path, so very urban hiking kind of thing, to the very remote hiking, and you can get very short to very long segments.
Right, but what if you're wanting to build from being at that lower level up to being able to go the trail, for example? Like, what would be your advice on pushing yourself?
Oh, how to build up? Oh, I mean, it would be kind of like any other probably walking or running program or biking, and you just start, you know, short, and then you just keep adding on. There's a good 10% rule is what I've read in many different sports. So if you do a hike that's 10 miles 1 week, then the next you build it up to 11 miles, and you just keep progressing like that. And yeah, sorry, I misunderstood your question. Yes?
What are some of your favorite sections of the Ice Age Trail?
Oh, it's like picking a favorite child, which I don't have. Well, okay, I'm gonna answer that way, 2 ways. One, I just want to say, give every segment a chance. I feel very badly that the first time through I called some segments ugly and said, why is this a segment? I would rather hike on the road. And then when I came through the next time, which is basically the exact same time of year, but I was hiking it the opposite direction, so I would hit these trails sometimes just a week's difference, and they would be like filled with wildflowers. Everything had been dying like the time I came through. So give every section many chances. But if I had to pick, some of the nicer ones that I liked were Point Beach. It's pure, kind of perfect terrain because it's these gently rolling hills, nothing too steep, nothing really flat, a lot of pine needles, which I like, and then you get the lake in there. There's Chippewa Moraine in the northwestern part of the state, and the Lake 11 that goes through the Chequamegon Natural Forest. Some of those are just beautiful as well. I like your Arboretum here a lot. I just found that very lovely as well. But it's so hard. Gibraltar Rock in, I don't know if that's, I think north of Dane County, maybe Sauk or Columbia. That's a really pretty segment. Going across the ferry, Merrimack Ferry is part of the trail. That's fun. I mean, how can you not like that? Although ice cream places were closed when I was there. I know, it's like you have to have an ice cream cone when you go over there. And so what happened, I know I had so many things like that. Between Dots was closed, the ice cream places were closed. I was trying to find this place called the Hillbilly Hilton. I didn't see that. I was trying to have this famous pizza at the Mondo Esker Lodge, and it was my birthday, no less, Sunday morning, and it was closed. So I didn't get the pizza. But that's okay. The Ice Age Trail, by the way, speaking of food, passes a wonderful frozen custard shop in Slinger. I highly recommend it. I can't remember the name, but the trail goes right past it, so it's the only one you'll pass. So if you have a hankering for ice cream or custard on a hot day, or even not a hot day, that place is awesome.
Each of the counties have the patch program, do you know?
So the patch program, or each chapter has the option of having some kind of a Saunters program where you can sign up and you pay like $10, something like that. And every time you hike a segment, you cross it off, and when you're all completed, you fill out a form and you hand it in. I believe in Rock County, is it a t-shirt or a patch? Oh, it's a patch, okay. So yes, then you get your patch. So that's a fun thing to do. It's a nice way to mark the trail. I don't think they all have them yet, but I don't, maybe Dennis knows. Do you know, is it like 2/3 or a half? Okay, so about 2/3 of the chapters run these programs. But yeah, it's fun. I've got them all over my backpack now. And someone taught me, because I tried to stitch these patches on, and I'm not a sewer, and it was really awful, and I don't have a thimble or anything, and my fingers are getting all beat up. And someone said, well, no, you just buy this sticky stuff at Walmart, and you just stick them on your pack. So it's like, oh, okay. So now that's what I do with my patches. Yes, woman in black.
So what is your next project?
Oh, well, so I've decided, I keep saying this to everyone, so I have to do it. I've decided to try and hike all 11 National Scenic Trails. If I was smart, because I'm not getting any younger, I would do the hardest ones first, those Triple Crown ones, but for some reason I keep doing all the easier ones first, like that little New England trail and the Florida trail that was largely flat. But no, I'm going to try, I think I'm going to try and do the Arizona Trail in the spring. There could be snakes and scorpions. That makes me a little nervous, but that's okay. And, pardon? Well, actually there might be bears in the northern part because, you know, there's forest up in the north. And my husband and I have been doing section hiking on the North Country National Scenic Trail. That'll take like 20 years to finish, but that's okay. We're chipping away at it. We're going to do 60 miles this week starting Thursday. Yay. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's kind of a sad story. So in my book, it's Valderie, and if you read the book, it had all these great connections with my life and very meaningful name. But when I went onto the Florida Trail last year and met all these really pro hikers, and they all had their trail names, they're all easy names, Boxcar and Beerman and Scout, and they said, so you have to hike together through the swamp the first 3 days. So I'm hiking with these people, and they kept going, so Valderie, you know, and it's like, no, Valderie. And most of these people were my age, and I'm like, well, you know that song, The Happy Wanderer, Valderie, Valderie, and I'm singing it, and they're all like, no, never heard of it. I'm like, oh, come on. So finally, when this boxcar just couldn't say the name, and I said, do I need a new trail name? And they all yell, yes! So I'm like, all right. So then my son was hosting something called a snowshoe beer mile. It's the only one of its kind in the world that we know of. Beer miles are a big thing in the running group, so he was having one in the winter in snowshoes. And I was leaving the Florida Trail in time to get back to the snowshoe beer mile, and I thought I should be snowshoe because I'm leaving for that reason. I'm from the big white north. Everyone around me was from the south in Florida. And snowshoe's happy, and it's easy to say. So I became snowshoe, and everyone loved that name. So yeah, I feel really bad because now Valderie's in the book, and it does have so many better connotations to it than snowshoe, but I'm sticking with snowshoe. And if anyone doesn't know, I should just say this too. So trail names are a thing. They started, I suppose, on the Appalachian Trail since it was the earliest trail. But what happens is you either can take a name for yourself, or usually when you're hiking with somebody, if you don't have a name, you do something stupid or funny, like Trip or something, and somebody gives you a trail name. And so I had wanted to proactively select a name because I thought I'm the type that would do something klutzy or stupid and get a really dumb trail name that I hated. So I proactively took my name, but like there was I met a couple, I was on the Superior Hiking Trail in June, which is in Minnesota on their North Shore, and there was a young husband and wife who was hiking, and he said the second day he was eating his wife's homemade granola, and he had a crown on and his whole tooth came out. Or some, it had to be more than a crown. So here he was like laughing, this big gap here. And he's like, my wife now is said my trail name has to be Toothless. And then she's like, but I don't have a trail name yet. So I later on, as soon as we left him, I'm like, well, she's got to be Granola. So I emailed her later. I'm like, your trail name has to be Granola. So yeah, so it's that kind of thing. But it's a fun kind of practice. Yes?
When you did the El Camino de Santiago, where did you start from and how many miles did you go on that?
Well, so the Camino, some people don't know this. The Camino de Santiago, it's an old ancient pilgrimage route from the Middle Ages to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, in the northwestern portion of Spain. And most people, 70% of the hikers that hike that trail, take this route across the northern part of Spain from France. It's called the French Way or the Camino Francés. But actually, there are many paths that go to Santiago. They're all called the Camino, but they all have these other sub-names. And there's 5 main paths, because people would come from all over Europe, leave their homes in the Middle Ages, and go on these routes. So I hiked one of the other 5 main routes called the Via de la Plata, or Silver Way. And that went from Seville in the south, north up to Santiago. So I know it's strange when you try and when you first learn about it and try and explain it. It's like, what? They're all the Camino? I don't get it.
Yeah, they said it started wherever you were.
Yes. So actually, if we're here, your trip would start here in Janesville, and you get on the plane and whatever, boat. And any other questions out there? If not, we have Dennis James from the wonderful Rock County chapter. He can tell you all about how to get involved. There are plenty of ways. You don't have to be chopping down trees. I like to bake cookies for the people who chop down the trees. That's usually my contribution. So there's many different ways to help out. And I know a lot of you purchase books, which I thank you so much. But if anyone else is interested, I'll be in the back selling the books as well. So thank you so much.